All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. Welcome to Google I/O 2010. It's a real honor to be here at the last session of the day. I hope you guys have enjoyed yourselves. Have you guys enjoyed the session so far? All right. So on the day one keynote, the opening of Google I/O 2010, we showed you where the HTML5 platform was. We showed you a bunch of great capabilities that we were adding to the platform. We showed you some awesome partner applications like MugTug Darkroom, Clicker. We showed you an amazing demo by Sports Illustrated. I hope that these serve to get you excited about what you can do with HTML5. But the exciting thing is that we're not done yet. We've still got a ways to go. So in the keynote, we talked about three main areas. We talked about platform capabilities, about letting you make your web applications as rich, contentful, and featureful as desktop applications. And we also talked about solving the problems of discovery and monetization. In today's talk, I'm going to focus on the platform. I want to share with you some examples of the work that we've done in Google Chrome in terms of lessons learned, some examples of UI decisions that we had to make, sort of give you an insight into how all of this development works. So my name's Fette. I'm a product manager on the Google Chrome team. And standing beside me is Jeff Chang, also a product manager on the Google Chrome team. And together, I hope we are going to provide you with a good hour of entertainment. So what are we talking about? I first want to go over what is actually in HTML5. There's a lot of confusion there. I want to give an update on what has happened since last year. Who all was here at Google I/O 2009? All right, I see a lot of hands here. We had a talk last year on HTML5. There was a lot of progress made between last year and this year, so I want to talk about some of that, some lessons learned, some new APIs that we've added since then. And I also want to tell you about what's coming up next. Like all the other sessions here at Google I/O 2010, we're live waving. The link is down there on the bottom. So if you want to follow along, if you want to ask any questions, feel free. Of course, if you have questions at the end, you're welcome to come up to the mic and ask a question there. So what the heck is in HTML5? Even as of last year at Google I/O 2009, HTML5 had already become a buzzword. A lot of people use HTML5 to sort of mean the new capabilities that have been added since roughly 2008, give or take. Is it technically correct? No. There is a specification called HTML5, but a lot of things have come in to the specification and gone out of the specification as time moves on. So when I say HTML5, I'm going to use it in the buzzword sense. I'm going to use it to mean the new capabilities that we're adding. So what are some of these examples of changes that have happened to the HTML5 spec? HTML5 has actually shed a lot of features. When HTML5 started, it was a spec being written in the What working group. This was a consortium of browsers and other interested people online trying to come together to form a specification for what would become the next HTML standard. And it was one big, giant, monolithic spec. When a lot of this work moved over to W3C, some things were split out of the specification into different specifications, into different working groups even. So a lot of the storage APIs, things like the Web SQL database, Web Index database, now called Index Database API, is in a different working group. Geolocation, different working group. File API, different working group. Does this actually matter? No, it doesn't. A lot of this was done for convenience. A lot of it was, when you have one mailing list, one giant working group, it's really easy for things to get lost in the stream. It's hard to follow what you're interested in. So a lot of this was split out merely for convenience, not because it's less important or because we're not as committed to it. It's merely for the convenience of those contributing to and implementing the spec. So the fact that your favorite API may not be in the HTML5 spec proper and it's in a different spec in a different working group is not something that you need to worry about. Don't worry about it. We still love it. We're still implementing it. But given that there's so much in HTML5, what are we actually excited by? What are we spending our time on? What are we committing resources to developing specifications and implementing? There's a few big areas that we spent a lot of time on over the past year. You can see some of them on the screen. One of them is offline. We've been working on offline actually for more years than I care to admit. We started at Google with Google Gears, which was our attempt to give offline capabilities to web applications. Google Gears gave web applications the ability to run offline, as well as the ability to store data on the user's computer. I'm very, very happy to see that there is now a standard, an actual W3C standard around how to do offline web applications and how to store data offline. So we've spent a lot of time over the past year implementing those standards and making sure that people can use offline web applications in Google Chrome using web standards. This is very important to us. We didn't just say, you know, oh, we have Gears, we have offline capabilities, we're done. We said, there's a standard, we're going to support that, we're going to implement that. We spent a lot of time on media. For those of you who were here yesterday and saw the keynote, we announced that we're open sourcing VP8. Why are we doing this? Well, we believe that video is an important part of the web and that there needs to be a free and open codec for video. So we have invested not just in making video supported in Google Chrome, but in making sure that there is a viable option for an open video standard on the web. Networking. There's an API called WebSockets that makes it possible for you to have bidirectional communication from your client application, your web application, back up to a server. So I see some people out there saying, you know, what's he talking about? I can do this already. It's called XML HTTP request. And yes, you do have XHR, and you can do hanging gets to have communication back and forth between your web application and your server. But this has some overhead, some downsides. Let's say that you have a chatty application that each time the user presses a key, it sends a message to the server. Google Wave, for instance, when you're typing in Wave, all those characters get sent to the server and then sent down to everyone else following the wave. If you think about how this actually works, each time you send a new request to the server, you're not just sending that letter, you're sending all the cookies, all the headers. So we're very excited about a new specification called WebSockets that lets you keep a persistent connection open between the server between the server and the web application that's bidirectional, so that either the server or the client can send data back and forth with much less overhead. We spent a lot of time on that over the past year. We're actively contributing to that specification. Things like CSS3, paged media, giving you more control over how your content is displayed, both on the screen and on the printed page. So CSS3 gives you more primitives for doing layout that have been very difficult in the past, and paged media gives you primitives for how you do that layout on the printed page. Things like controlling page margins, headers, footers, all sorts of, there's like 16 margin boxes that you can configure and put random stuff in there. You can also specify, you know, what's supposed to happen if I design my page for, my printed page for A4 and the user has letter, or vice versa. So again, this is something that we think is important. If you look at Google Documents lets you print. Right now, it generates a PDF. You know, that's, it works. Is it optimal? No. So this is an area that we're spending time on. And platform integration. You saw some of this in the keynote. We'll talk a bit more about this today. We believe it's very important that as desktop applications can integrate with the platform, we believe it's important that web applications can also integrate with the host platform on which they're running. So again, why are we doing this? We're doing this because we want to provide a rich experience for web applications. We want you to be able to give your users the same sort of features and experiences that they could get from a desktop application designed to achieve a similar goal. So, you know, we've spent a lot of time this year working on these APIs. A lot of man hours have gone into this. We've learned a few lessons. I want to share some of those lessons with you and give you an insight into what it's like building a browser, building web standards, building new APIs. One of the first lessons that we learned, I said that we'd been working on offline apps for years. Believe me, we've learned a lot of lessons with offline apps. Still not perfect. We've got a ways to go, but we're learning. One of the key lessons that we learned was around discovery and rediscovery. I don't know if any of you used the offline version of Gmail with Gears. I see a few nods. One of the problems is that it's very hard for a user to remember that they need to type in a URL to reach your offline application. You know, when you're offline, when you're in a plane, when you board that flight back home tonight, and you say, gee, I want to access my email, I don't have Wi-Fi, what do I do? You know, you guys in the audience are pretty tech savvy. A number of you might figure out that you can actually open the browser and type in https://mail.google.com. And oh, by the way, the origin actually has to match. So if you just type in gmail.com or http://mail.google.com, might not work. Whoops. That's a problem. And that's assuming that you even remember that you need to type in a URL. So with Gears, we put a shortcut on the desktop. And that was a step forward. But it still didn't solve the problem fully. So what we announced yesterday was the Chrome Web Store. Part of the Chrome Web Store is about making your applications discoverable, helping users find that application that you've spent the time to write. But the problem is not just finding the application the first time. The problem is finding the application the second time and the third time. The rediscovery problem. Knowing how you get back to that application, knowing how you launch that application, and actually feeling that that application is available to you even when offline. So with the Web Store, we're changing the new tab page of Chrome to give web applications a presence, not just in the form of bookmarks or an icon on the new tab, like one of the most visited pages, but an actual first-class treatment as an installed application in Google Chrome. We're doing this in part so that users can rediscover that application and know how to get back to it. So that when you are offline and you say, gee, how do I get to my email? Was it http://mail.google.com, https://mail.google.com, gmail.com, gmail.de? No, that doesn't exist. You can just click on the icon, and it's there. So this has been one thing that we've learned from offline applications. Another thing that we learned was that offline applications usually use more APIs than normal web pages. Turns out if you're an offline application, you probably want to have some offline data. But how much offline data do you have? If it's an email app, 10 years ago, maybe 5 megabytes would have done it. That's our current default quota for offline data. Today, I bet most of you in this room have more than 5 megabytes of email. When we designed a lot of the storage APIs, we sort of scratched our head and said, gee, you know, what do we do for quota? Well, we don't want any random web application to be able to fill up the disk. That sounds bad. So let's put a limit on it. Let's say 5 megabytes. That seems sort of safe. Like, you know, I'm willing to give you 5 megabytes. You can already store cookies and cache, so what the heck, 5 megs. But what do you do when you want to have more than that? We can prompt the user and say, you know, gmail.com wants to use another 5 megabytes or another 100 megabytes. Do you want to allow this, yes or no? But when do you prompt it? If you think about it in terms of how the spec is written today, the logical answer would be when you get somewhere near to filling up the quota, lots of hand waving, you know, the user agent should do something intelligent, which most people interpret as prompting. But when are you going to hit 5 megabytes? You know, if you say, I want to install Gmail offline and I want to use Gmail, it would make sense to prompt right then, but you're not going to hit that 5 meg quota right then. We're going to start synchronizing some data, and then maybe a minute later you hit 5 megabytes. So you say, yes, install Gmail, yes, let it work offline, and then a minute later you get another info bar, yes, let it use more storage, and then maybe it wants to use notifications, and you say, yes, let it use notifications, and you end up answering like 50 info bars. And it's like, geez, I just wanted to use this app. You know, when I installed an app on my Android phone, I didn't have to like click yes on 50 different info bars. Why is this so hard? So another thing that the Chrome Web Store is solving is this problem of permissions. With the Chrome Web Store, when you upload your application to the Chrome Web Store, we let you specify a set of permissions that you want your application to have. So now, when a user goes to the Chrome Web Store and says, yes, I want to install this application, we can handle all those permissions up front. And we can say, yes, this app should be allowed to access the location and access more than 5 megabytes of local storage and access notifications. So this has been a huge lesson learned from us. Is it standard yet? Are all browsers going to do this? No, it's not standard yet. We are trying to see what works. We're hopeful that we can find a solution that works well. And assuming that we find a solution that works well, we're hopeful we can then contribute that back in some sort of a standard-friendly manner. That's how we do things. We don't try to specify everything up front. We try to innovate. We try to make sure that we can produce a good user experience and then contribute that to a standard. So another lesson learned. How many of you have used Web SQL Database, the local storage, well, it's called Web SQL Database now, but it basically gives you a SQL database in the browser. Anyone used it? All right, I see a number of hands. One of the problems that this spec faces, I personally love it. I think it's a very good idea. A lot of people are familiar with SQL. They like SQL. But one of the problems it faces is that it's sort of hard to specify how this should work. Is there a SQL standard? Yes, there actually is something called SQL, and it has a standard around it. But no implementation just implements SQL. Everyone implements SQL plus, whatever else. How many of you use MySQL on the server side? I see a lot of MySQL people. How many of you use Postgres? I see some Postgres people. How many of you use SQLite? I see some SQLite people. How many of you use MS SQL Server? Some people. How many of you use Oracle? More hands. So turns out, if you try to write a web application, you have to care about that. You have to care, am I running on SQLite? Am I running on MySQL? Am I running on Postgres? And how many of you have ever upgraded MySQL and had your application stop working? I see some hands there. So when we're designing a specification, it turns out it's not really sufficient to just say, issue a SQL query and return a result. We have to say what that means in some sort of a way that's going to withstand the test of time. So 10 years from now, maybe we don't want to use SQLite 3. Maybe we want to use SQLite 4. And maybe that has a different syntax. Maybe we don't want to use SQLite at all. Maybe we want to use something else. Maybe another browser, which today wants to implement this specification, doesn't want to use SQLite and wants to use an alternative implementation. What should they match? Is there an actual standard that specifies what the output is with a given set of input? Today, there's not. So we're looking at alternatives. One alternative that's being proposed is to specify that dialect of SQL that's appropriate for this API. I'm personally hopeful that'll happen, because I do think that there are a number of developers who are comfortable with the SQL model and want to use SQL on the client side just as they use it on the server side. But not everyone likes SQL, and there are some concerns about whether we can actually specify this dialect. So there's another approach that we're taking at the same time, and this is called the Index Database API. How many of you out there are familiar with ISAM? I see some hands. OK, good. We have some computer science majors in the room. What ISAM is, what this API basically tries to achieve, is to provide a table that is indexed on a single field. And so you have an index that is either a DOM string or a long, so something that we can easily index. And then you have an associated value. And this value can be pretty much anything. It can be an object, it can be an array, whatever. So you then do lookups on this table based on the key. So this key could be an author name, it could be a book ID, whatever you want. And then you pull up its value. And that's it. It's just matching on the index. You have no complex query language. You can't do joins, anything like that. If you want to do any query refinement to say, author is this and is hardcover or something like that, you do that in JavaScript. If you want to do any joins, taking two tables, joining the two together, again, you do this in JavaScript. This gives us a powerful database, but also one that's very easy to specify. So we're in the middle of implementing this. No browser actually has an implementation yet. We're working on it. Hopeful that this turns into a standard cross-browser API that's available everywhere, is future-proof. Don't know if people will actually write on top of it directly. My personal guess is that we will see a lot of abstraction layers written on top of this API to make it easier to use. So any of you database geeks out there, feel free to start writing. What else have we learned? Storage. Databases are great, but some people want to store files. If you think about an email application, you want a way to store attachments. If you think about an image program like MugTug Darkroom that you saw in the keynote, you want a way to store images. And any of you database guys out there know that if you try to shove a large amount of binary data in your database and it's not designed for that, bad things happen. Turns out a lot of people try to implement file systems on top of databases. So we figured, well, what the heck? If people want file systems, let's give them a file system. So now we're working on a file system API that gives you, the web author, the ability to have a sandboxed per origin file system. So what you get is essentially, and this isn't specified this way, but in most implementations I've seen, what you get is a folder somewhere buried deep in the user's profile directory into which you can create new files and read files. So this is basically like a ch-rooted file system that you can do whatever the heck you want with. So if you want to store email attachments, great, you can do it. You want to store images, great, you can do it. You want to store all your email in something like a Maildir format, you can do that too. And the cool thing is that we have exposed APIs for file reader and file writer that let you read and write these files. And we're letting you create blobs that you can insert anywhere that you would normally insert a URL. So if you want to say image source equals some file, we're going to make that work. If you want to say read the file, sorry, if you want to say href equals some file so that the user can click on it and download it or open it in whatever other program they would use to open that type of file, we're going to make that work. We're going to make it possible for you to get a URN from these files that you can use anywhere you would use a web URL. So we're trying to make it a very flexible API. This is also work in progress. We're implementing it in WebKit, so it should be available in Chrome and Safari, hopefully this summer. And my personal favorite, geolocation. You saw geolocation in Android quite a while ago. You saw geolocation in Gears a while ago. And it sounded sort of simple from a security perspective. You say, OK, here's a website. The website wants to access the user's location. I'll ask the user and say, should maps.google.com be allowed to access your location, yes or no? Turns out that when we actually implemented this in Chrome and we sat down and we had a bunch of really privacy-minded people from our Germany office as well as some people here in the Bay Area, we started thinking about some use cases where it wasn't quite as clear-cut. If I'm on maps.google.com and I say, yes, allow my location, I understand that. I get it. I'm saying, OK, Google can get my location for Google Maps. Got it. Great. Next. What happens now when I go to another website like Yelp.com that has an embedded Google Maps gadget? Should my location show up? I don't know. I said, yes, let maps.google.com access my location. And technically, there's JavaScript from maps.google.com that's trying to access my location. So you could argue that, sure, let's give the location out. That sounds great. But from a user perspective, what's actually happening? I'm not on maps.google.com. I'm on yelp.com or some other site. And someone wants my location. It's not really what I expect that I see my location being given out. So what we did is something different. And I'll show you. So here I am in Google Chrome. This is actually Chromium, a nightly build. And I go to maps.google.com. I click the Show My Location button. And I see this little info bar saying, maps.google.com wants to track your location. I say allow. And now I see here I am. I'm up in San Francisco at Moscone West. Great. And I see this little indicator up here saying this page is tracking your location. I understand what's going on. I'm comfortable with this. It's something that I understand. Now let's say that I go to another web page, which maybe is not quite as reputable. It's this ianfette.com site. Who knows what that guy's doing? He's iframing Google Maps. Oh, my God. Is my location going to show up if I click this button? And the answer right now is no. It's not going to show up, because what we did is we tied the permission not just to the origin of the script requesting the location, but also the origin of the top-level document. So here I am on ianfette.com. I'm not getting access. And it's telling me that my location is being requested. So I actually trust ianfette. It's me. So I'm going to allow it. And here I am at Moscone West. So what actually gets saved from that? If I click this little indicator in the Omni box, I see that maps.google.com is tracking my location. If I hit Manage Location Settings, I can see I'm always asked whether a site should be able to see my location. If I click Exceptions, I can see the rules I've specified. Here you see that maps.google.com can get my location, and maps.google.com, when embedded on ianfette.com, can get my location. But maps.google.com on ianfette.org, for instance, would not be able to access my location. So this was an example of an API that we had implemented twice, we thought was pretty simple, but turned out to actually have some pretty tricky UI problems. So when people say, oh, it's easy to add another API, it's easy to provide this functionality, just ask the user, turns out that asking the user is not always easy to do. So when we were here at Google I/O 2009 last year, we were talking about a lot of these APIs. We were talking about storage, about geolocation. What have we actually done over the past year? What are the new work areas that we started on this year? One of the really cool ones, and it actually might not sound that cool, but it is, I promise you, is shared state between pages. I talked earlier about the file system API. If any of you have written native code, you know that when dealing with files, you have to worry about race conditions. You have to worry about two threads accessing the same file at once and both trying to make modifications to that file. Bad things can happen if you don't worry about concurrency. Turns out that with the file API, the file system API that we're writing, same thing can happen. You can have race conditions. You can have concurrency issues. And HTML and JavaScript don't really provide you with great mechanisms for handling things like locking. So what do? There's an API called Shared Workers that lets you effectively have multiple pages, multiple tabs, multiple frames, whatever, in the same origin, communicating with each other via a post-message interface. And one of the cool applications of this is that you can use a shared worker to serialize your file system access. So you could have a shared worker do all the access to the file system, and you could have all your other worker threads in the main thread just send requests to the shared worker saying, please edit this file in the following way, and the shared worker can take care of ensuring that all of those are done in a safe manner. So shared workers are great. We love them. But they do have some downsides. One of the downsides is that there's no single scripting context. So you can't just take a huge part of the DOM and hand it off to a shared worker and then hand that off to another worker or another window. It doesn't work. It's only things that you can serialize and pass in via post message. So what do? Turns out that this is actually a useful thing to do. One of the things that we're working on in Gmail is making it possible for you to open up a chat window or a compose window or any other tear-off window and have that be fast, but also have that window survive if you close the main window. So we want to have a shared scripting context. So we're working on something that we call shared iframe that gives us a shared scripting context with which we can pass around a part of the DOM so we can build up that compose window even before you open it and then just hand off the DOM. We can make that window survive even after the main window is closed by keeping all the state in what we call the magic iframe. This is a new approach. It's not yet standard. Again, it's us trying to think, how do we innovate? How do we do something new that addresses real use cases? And if it turns out the developers like it, we will work on making sure that it's available in all browsers and standards. At this point, I want to turn over to my colleague, Jeff Chang, who's going to talk to you a little bit about some work we've done around files, dragging files, and even more.
Thanks, Ian. Is the mic on? Yes, great. Thanks, Ian. So hopefully by now you all recognize that we want to make web applications as powerful as, if not more powerful than, desktop applications. And one of the areas in which we're doing that is dragging and dropping. Dragging and dropping not only files from the desktop or the file system into the browser, but vice versa. And obviously, it's a very simple and intuitive way to kind of interact with files, which is why it's important. There are a few different examples here, so let me just walk through each of them. So one of them is dragging in from the desktop or any folder in the file system into the browser. One thing you can do here is you can listen to the drop event, obtain the file object, and send it via XML HTTP request to the server. This makes sense if you have a feature where you want to upload a file to the server. And as you saw during the keynote, and there's a screenshot there, but I'll go ahead and show you now, this can be used in Gmail to upload files to in emails. So let's say I have an email here. Go ahead and minimize this. And I have a file on the desktop that I want to attach. So let me go ahead and compose a message. And if I have the file here, all I have to do is take it, drag it over the message. It tells me I can drop the files here as some attachments, let go, and the file gets uploaded to the server. Very intuitive, very simple, it just works. And let me show you another thing too. This is also another feature we recently launched in Gmail. You can actually drag the image in to attach it as an inline attachment directly within the message text itself. So as long as my cursors are there and I drag it and drop it in this section instead, then boom, I get the nice little kitten inside the message itself. So that's very cool, and it just works. So there's other instances too when you want to drag a file in, but you might not necessarily want to send it up to the server. Maybe the point of it is that you want to just drag the file in and start interacting with it. If you saw the keynote, there was the application we showed off, MugTug Darkroom, that Charles Pritchard showed. And in this case, it's a photo editing application. But let's say I have this kitten and I actually want to do some photo editing effects on the kitten. I can simply drag it over here, and using the file reader interface in the file API, I can now start interacting with the file directly on my local machine. And so I can apply the filters and change the colors and whatnot. And in this whole time, the file has stayed on my local machine, so it doesn't need to be sent up to the server. And in fact, this works offline as well. So that's dragging in. There's also dragging out. That's from the browser. Oh no, Shift F5, right? Oh, I already lost the slide, sorry. There we go. So dragging out involves dragging from the browser to the desktop. And in this case, you can actually use the download URL format in the data transfer object, which contains the file type, the name of the file, and the URL from which to download the file. So let me show you a sneak peek of a feature that we are building in Gmail that takes advantage of this. This feature is basically you have an email and you have a file attachment here, and you want to save it to somewhere on your computer. I could just click the download link here, and I know that's going to put it into the default directory that Chrome downloads to, whatever that's set to. But this isn't my computer. I don't actually know where exactly that would download to. I don't want to kind of hunt around for the file. I just know I want to save the file right here on the desktop. So what I'll do is I'll just hover over it. It prompts me click or view to drag to save, drag, drop right here, and bam, it downloads it to my desktop. So again, very simple, very intuitive, and a great way to interact with files. Another cool feature is notifications. You hopefully saw this during the keynote as well. I think the use case here is pretty clear. You want to let the application notify the user in an unobtrusive manner. And this can be a variety of situations. This could be, let's say you have a calendar event that's coming up that's really important, you don't want to miss that. Let's say you have an email that's coming into your inbox, you want to be notified about that. You have tweets coming in, you want to see those. Or in this case, let's say somebody sends you a Google chat, then bam, you get a notification. So in terms of the actual way that this is implemented, the developer, the app developer can provide the content as HTML or plain text. This feature does have to be opt-in. The user does have to, permission it does have to be assigned on an origin basis for notifications. And in Chrome, we do that in a similar way to what Ian showed with geolocations. You get a little info bar at the top that says, would you like to let this domain show you notifications? So there's currently 2 specs in progress. One's on the W3C website, and one's on the chromium.org website. But the plan is to deprecate the Chromium-specific one in favor of the standards track one. And I believe the W3C one is currently in editor's draft. So that's notifications. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Ian now, who's going to talk about some more stuff on the horizon.
Thanks, Jeff. So what's over the horizon? We've showed you what we've done. We've showed you some things that we've been working on over the past year. What's coming next? Turns out there's a lot of new capabilities coming. If you look at a lot of the demos from Android this morning, you'll see that people used voice. Voice turns out to be a very natural interaction mechanism. People want to speak their input for certain types of queries. If you think about it, I drove here in a Toyota Prius. I could hit a button and say, Moscone West. I could drive up here. I have that pre-programmed. It gets recognized. I can control my car with my voice. And my car can speak back to me. There's voice recognition, and there's text-to-speech. So we figured, why not build that into the browser? So we're going to do it. How do we do it, though? We don't want to just give you a giant WAV file and say, here you go, figure out what the user said. That wouldn't actually be that useful. So what we're doing is we're adding a new input tag. We're calling it input type equals speech. And our vision for this is that it will, like input type equals text, probably produce a little text area, but also have a little microphone button that the user can click on to say, yes, I actually want to speak now, and I want you to recognize when I'm speaking. And when the user does this, we will recognize the user's speech. We'll take that audio, send it up to a server for processing, although it could also be done locally depending on implementation, and make that available to the website. So whatever the user speaks will be transcribed and put into the value of the tag. We'll also give you even more control, though, because it turns out that's not quite sufficient. For any of you who have dealt with speech processing in the past, you know that in specialized areas, you might want to restrict the grammar. So if you're calling up Delta and they're asking you, is this a domestic flight or an international flight? Turns out they only want to know if it's domestic or international. They don't want to know if you want pizza. So if you provide a grammar, you can make it possible to have even better accuracy in the recognition. So we're going to support providing a grammar for that input tag. We'll also give you events, like change events and stop events, so that you can process the data sequentially. So as the user is speaking and we recognize another word, we'll give you an event on that so that you can act on that. Or if you only care about it at the end, we'll give you an event for that too. So that's how you can get data in from voice. How do you get data out? How do you speak results back? How do you say, you know, turn left in 300 meters? Oops, you went too far. Make a legal U-turn when possible. We're going to provide an API that we call text-to-speech. You know, it makes sense, TTS. This will be another tag where you provide a value, and that value is whatever gets spoken to the user. But we're going to make it just like the audio tag. So we'll inherit from the audio tag so that you'll have all the same controls that you would have from the audio tag. You can play, you can pause, you can stop. You can script it via JavaScript in the exact same way that you would script an audio tag or a video tag. So we're hopeful that these two APIs together will enable a whole new class of applications on both mobile browsers as well as desktop browsers. Because if you look at a lot of netbooks being sold today, they all have microphones in them. So why not let the websites access them? Turns out that many cameras, netbooks, and even laptops have another device. Whoops, sorry. So we're not just going to give you access to speech input. We're not just going to do transcription. We also realize that if you really want to access that microphone and do everything you can with it, you might want to record the sound. Excuse me. You might want to record yourself singing a new Lady Gaga song so that you can put that up on YouTube. Or you might just want to, for whatever reason, take that, process it as a wave, and do your own processing. So we're going to give you access to the microphone in terms of just being able to get a single blob out. The other API that we want to expose is access to the webcam. It turns out that that's the other device that many laptops, netbooks, and cameras, cell phones are shipping with, is a camera. So how do we give you access to that? Similar to the microphone, we want to provide two methods. We want to provide a way for you to just get a blob, a still picture that you can use locally, upload to the server, whatever you want. And we also want to be able to give you a stream. So if you want to have a video chat application, for instance, we want to enable that. So we want to give you access to a stream of video as well. This is not something that we have working yet. It's something that is in progress. You saw a preview of this in the keynote, but there's a lot more to come in this area. So audio is cool. I love cars talking to me. I love hearing a recorded sound played back to me. But how many gamers do I have out here? OK, good. I see some hands. I love games. Turns out that if you're playing a first-person shooter and you've got a 5.1 sound system, you want to know who's shooting at you and from where. You want positional audio. You want that sound to be able to come not just from the right or from the left, but from in front of you, from behind you, from at an angle. You want things like reverb. So we are going to give you access to a fully featured positional audio API that will give you all of these controls. It'll give you things like control over directionality. It'll give you volume, send configuration, gain, inner-outer core, distance attenuation, pitch, occlusion, obstruction, reverb. All of these things will be supported. And it'll be supported in a way that's simple for you so that you don't have to implement a full physics engine in JavaScript just to try to do positional audio on your own. So this will also make it possible to develop richer games in the browser. But richer games need more than just great audio. Turns out they need great video, and Canvas and the video tag alone are not enough. So we're working on supporting 3D in the browser. There's a new specification being developed called WebGL that exposes OpenGL via JavaScript bindings. And with this, you can create immersive 3D scenes. So you can access the full power of the GPU that's on that desktop computer, that's on that laptop computer, that may even be on that mobile phone. So this 3D video, together with positional audio, will also enable a new class of applications. WebGL was actually pioneered a while ago by Firefox, and Google also did work in this area with O3D. There's some differences between WebGL and the O3D work that we did earlier. Namely, with O3D, you build up a scene, and that scene is retained, so it's called a retain mode API. And you can make changes to the scene. You can say, take the torch and make it lean left, lean right, but you don't redraw the scene each time. With WebGL, it's a direct or immediate mode API, so each time you issue queries saying, draw this vertex here, this vertex there, you basically draw it each time. So there is a difference, but we're doing work for those of you who invested in O3D. We're doing work to provide a compatibility layer for O3D on top of WebGL. So we're excited by WebGL. I want to show you a quick demo of what you can do. I was hoping to be able to show you the beach demo. I can't show you that. But one of the cool things that you can do, if you look at the source code for this, which I'm not going to do, but this is actually very, very small in terms of source code. It's a pretty simple application, but I can do all sorts of things like create 3D effects, little puffs, little trails of fire going around in a circle. And it's all very possible. It works very well. And this actually works both in Google Chrome with a command line flag as well as Mozilla Firefox. So this is already getting great reception, great adoption. And I really do believe that this is going to enable a new class of applications, a new set of games, really help people understand that the browser is a great place to develop that application that you want to develop. So with that, I want to turn it over for Q&A. I hope that I have given you a bit of insight into how browser development works, how the development of standards works, and inspired you in terms of HTML5. That's my hope. Please feel free. There are microphones here in the aisles. If you have any questions, come on up. I'm happy to answer them. Thanks. Go for it.
Thank you for the talk. Can you explain the behavior, how the grammar attribute will work? Is there going to be a limit on the length, or how that attribute will work?
So there's an existing specification that I believe actually is being worked on in W3C for grammars of languages. We're hoping to leverage that existing specification. I have to apologize. I don't actually remember the name off the top of my head. What is it again? SSML. So if you search for that, you should be able to find more details in voice XML. Sorry. I don't actually remember off the top of my head. You'd have to search on that. But we're hoping to make it as full-featured as possible. Yes?
Hi. I'm very excited about exposing tensors on mobile devices through HTML5. Do you have plans to expose more, like the accelerometer and other things like that?
Yeah, so the Android web browser team is very interested in figuring out how we expose all the capabilities of the platform, not just the microphone and the camera, but things like the accelerometer, the magnetometer for direction.
Yeah.
So we're working on exposing all those. Of course, as we do that, we'll also work with standards bodies to make sure that there is a standard around this and it works not just on Android devices, but on any mobile device that chooses to implement the standard. We want to make that work everywhere.
And
so, yes.
I believe they demonstrated at least the compass in Android and in the browser during the keynote. They were showing it, turning it around.
Yeah, so we're definitely working on it. Thanks.
Speaking of new input devices, what about pressure sensitivity and subpixel positioning for graphics tablets?
Pressure sensitivity and subpixel positioning. I can't say it's honestly at the top of my priority list. I'm happy to add it onto the list and try to figure out how to do it, but Right now, I think we're at the point where we have so much going on. We're still working on a lot of the primitives, like how you store data, how you make an offline application accessible, how you draw basic data with Canvas and WebGL. So yes, I agree that it is a valid use case and it's something we should figure out how to do, but it's not something that we're actively working on just yet. Apologize.
At the risk
Although
of,
someone at W3C, as Doug tells me. Yes.
At the risk of sounding greedy, will you localize translate input speech and text to speech?
So will we localize, so you're basically asking will we do translation of the text to speech and voice input. Sounds like a fun challenge. I'm sure someone at Google would love to do it. I can't tell you that we're actually doing it yet, but it sounds fun, so we'll consider it. Yes?
So one thing I've noticed is that when the browser requires a permissions dialog, usually it seems to be at the point that the JavaScript requests for something. So is there like a way, maybe through a meta tag or something, that you can say this site is going to ask for location, for disk space, et cetera, before it gets to that point in the code?
So right now, there's not a declarative model to ask for a lot of these permissions in advance. It's one of the things that we're trying to figure out with the web store is how do I provide a good declarative model? And our hope is that if we get that right and developers respond positively saying, yes, this is a good model, this is a capability that we actually want, it works for us, that we can turn into a standard that's usable not just for applications packaged up in the web store, but on any application, regardless of whether it's in the web store or whether it's a URL I just browse to. So we want to make it possible for all web pages, getting a little bit of feedback. We want to make it possible for all web pages to declare the permissions that they intend to use. So it's something that we want to do. We're not there yet, but we're working on it.
And one thing to add to that, which Eric Kai showed at the web store session earlier today, was we definitely want to kind of simplify that user experience for people, because let's say you have a crazy awesome app that uses the camera and a microphone and notifications and geolocation and all this stuff. We don't want to just show the user info bar, like 5, 6 things. Do you want to do this? Do you want to let it do this? Do you want to? And they'll be like, yeah, I guess, maybe. And so the idea behind the web store, which Eric was showing, was at the time of installation of the application, when you're actually creating that shortcut on your new tab page, then you can see this application is using all these things. And that itself is hard-coded into the manifest that the application developer has provided. And so at that point, it's declared, and you never have to kind of inundate the user with a bunch of info bars.
Okay. I had a couple other questions. One, it seems to me that most voice systems are actually optimized to understand natural speech, so the way I'm speaking now. But I believe that a lot of people, when they speak to a computer speaks to them, hello, how are you? And then they want to speak back clear, enunciated, and then the system messes up. So how do you handle that? Have you considered that at all?
So yes and no. Yes, you definitely do need to take that into account when designing the voice recognition. It's sort of orthogonal to the actual standard that goes in the browser. But yes, it's something we're aware of, that certain people do tend to speak differently when speaking to a voice recognition system. However, there are a number of people who do not speak clearly and enunciate clearly when speaking to a computer. So you do have to handle both. It is something that our team that the voice team at Google is definitely aware of.
Okay. And then one other thing was...
Okay, last question, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's... so there's a lot of stuff going on with the browser, but in terms of HTML itself is, well, kind of ugly, and what about having some sort of system that could do searches through like JSON or something? I mean, as we're moving to web applications, being able to somehow understand content when it's not just HTML.
Yes, I mean there's a number of proposals for markup, for metadata. It's a lot of people for a lot of years have said, if we have all this metadata about data, we can do a better job of searching it. To some extent, that's true, but to another extent, if you look at Google as a search engine, it actually does a remarkable job just inferring from untagged data. So I don't know if I'm ready to throw in the towel on HTML just yet.
Thanks.
Yes.
If you drag a folder or multiple files, how is that handled? And the follow-up question is...
So you get a file list that you can then enumerate and get individual files out of from the file list.
So folder you can have, and you get everything, recursive folders, everything in there.
So there is a directory upload proposal that's being worked on by John Gregg. And I believe it's making the rounds on the WhatWG mailing list right now in order to be able to have an input type equals directory or whatever and actually have the recursive thing for the whole directory. So it's not in the spec yet, but it's definitely already being actively discussed.
Multiple files, yes. Directory with multiple files in the works.
Okay. And the follow-up is if you have a large file, like a gigabyte video, is there any resume upload or anything like that?
Is there any what? I'm sorry?
Resume upload.
So I think blob.slice does that, right?
So with the file API, you can get access to the file locally, and you can slice it to get access to parts of the file and send those up. We are working on ways to make it more convenient to do resumption. Not entirely clear right now how that'll look, but it is technically possible right now, if not convenient. Yes?
With the Chrome App Store, is there, when you download the information to one computer, is there any intent or something built in already for being able to use that application on a different computer with a different installation of Chrome?
So, I mean, I think in general with Chrome, we're definitely trying to make the web experience synced across all of your installations, and so that you can take your web experience with you as you travel to different computers and different installations. As you know, we already have things like bookmarks and themes and preferences, and so we certainly would envision the web store and your installed applications to fit into that picture.
Sounds good.
Yes.
So from what I've seen, your voice recognition software is pretty much awesome, but what's the expected quality for text-to-speech? Is it going to sound really blocky all the time? And what are you guys looking into to kind of make that more fluid so it sounds less like a robot and more like something's talking to me?
So text-to-speech has actually come quite a ways since, I think the first time I used it was Microsoft Agent back when I was in middle school. It's come a long ways. I can't get into any details about what we're specifically doing to make it better, and other implementations, other browsers might have different ideas for how they implement it, be that locally in the client or on the server. I think our main focus is on making the interaction possible, and once we have that base level, we'll see what needs are not met. If someone really wants to specify, make this sound like Governor Schwarzenegger, and here's some data that describes his voice, we'll try to figure out how to make that possible. But I think in V1 we're really just focused on the basic use case of how do I take this text and convert it to.
So in the basic use case, then, is it going to sound really blocky in the first run?
I don't think it's going to sound really blocky. I mean, I don't think it's going to sound like a 1990s robot. It might not be as configurable as you like, but I'm pretty sure that we'll be able to deliver a high quality.
It'll sound like a 2010 robot.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
I think we saw some of those last night. Yes, next question.
Hi. Regarding WebSockets, is there any kind of support in Android?
Is there any WebSocket support in Android? So a lot of the work that we did for WebSockets is contributed upstream in WebKit. Android pulls WebKit. I don't actually remember what revision they're pulling in Froyo and whether that includes WebSocket support and if they've done all the necessary plumbing for that. So the honest answer is I'm not entirely sure. I would love to see them support it, but I can't speak for that team. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Doug.
Hey. So I just wanted to, there were a lot of questions. You did some stuff on audio, and there were a lot of questions about audio. I just wanted to mention that W3C has a new sort of community audio group. So we're collecting use cases and requirements for everything from audio synthesis, audio reading and writing the audio stream, to text-to-speech, to the whole range of voice inputs. It's just sort of, it's a community thing, so if anybody wants to get involved in discussions about that, just come on by. Sorry to abuse the mic.
Oh, it's fine. And I should actually say something really quick. In terms of standards development, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of standards, and we don't always know what you want or whether these standards actually match what you want. So I encourage all of you to actually get involved. Go to whatwg.org, go to w3.org. Find these mailing lists. They're easy to find. There's public web apps at w3.org. There's whatwg at whatwg.org. Get involved. Follow them. If there is an API that you actually care about or that is addressing a use case that you care about, make sure that we hear your feedback. Make sure we know whether this API actually works for you or not. Because if you don't give us this feedback now, it's so much harder to go back and change it later, which is not to say that we can't do it, but getting that feedback now is super valuable. So please do get involved in things like the W3C.
I think if you Google for W3C audio incubator, that'll find you.
Thanks, Doug. I just heard Google. Next.
Speaking of APIs that we'd want, how would you go about? Something I really want is to have access within the browser to the certificate store, to encryption and decryption and signing, the stuff that every browser does for SSL, but I want to give it to my application.
Yep.
And where would I even start to plant the seed for that?
So where you would start is by going to, assuming there's no spec that already handles it, or even if there is, go to bugs.chromium.org and file a feature request and say, this is the kind of application that I want to build. This is the kind of use case that I want to support. How are you going to do it for me? And believe it or not, even though we do have tens of thousands of bugs open on that site, we do read them, and we will actually take that because that's how we know that people want this capability, and that's how we know that we need to look at it. It turns out that encryption is something that we're actually looking at already. If you look at a lot of banks in East Asia, particularly China and South Korea, all of them are using ActiveX controls to do signatures on transactions.
That's true.
So it's a very legitimate use case. There are a lot of existing uses of that. We need to figure out a way to support that with web standards. So it's something that I'm very keen to do. Unfortunately, I don't have a date for you on that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Is Google thinking about standardizing like parts of the web store experience, like app launching and the app caching or saving your web apps?
So I think we want to figure out what makes sense to standardize and standardize that. One of the examples is like the declarative permissions. We want to figure out how to standardize that. I don't think we'll standardize the entire thing. I mean, some of it is Chrome proprietary. But the parts that make sense that are cross-browser, yes. I mean, obviously, we're open to standardizing that. Yes?
For Chrome extensions, it's easy to do cross-domain requests. I'm just wondering if there's a way that Google's looking at making that kind of like a permission that could be added, so somebody could do that in non-extensions rather than using like JSONP or something.
So you can use things like CORS and UMP to specify what. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I'm blanking on the actual APIs. It should be possible. You're not ever going to be able from a web page to just randomly script another web page. But if that other web page opts in, it is possible to do that. I believe there's cross-origin XHR already shipping in Chrome. Come up to me after, and I will answer your question more fully. I apologize. You're catching me off the top of my head here.
No problem. Thanks.
So I see that my clock in the back is actually flashing red, so I think that means I'm out of time. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Jeff and I will hang out for a few minutes if you have more questions. Thank you very much.